I grew up in India. I got my bachelor's in engineering in 1973, a long time ago, and then came to UNB. And I did my master's and then taught for a year, and then I thought I was going to be a prof. So I went to Queens, got my PhD, and then something changed. There was a company in Toronto called ESC, which was sort of a very high-tech data communications company. Those days, they could make a modem on telephone line work at 9600 bits per second, and the current technology was about 300 baud, 300 bits per second. So, so the company was a great company. They really mastered the technology, but unfortunately, the company wasn't doing well. So they were going under, and so the VP of engineering, the head of engineering, Dr. Peter Brackett, had to quit the job, and he came to teach at Queens. So I and Peter became friends. And Motorola came and bought that company in '79, and when they bought the company, they asked Peter to go back and be the head of engineering. And so Peter went there, and about 3 months after he left, I got my PhD. So Peter called me up and said, hey, forget all this teaching, research, everything else, why don't you just come up here, it's a lot of fun. Because I knew Peter, I actually went to that place in Toronto, not knowing anything about these companies. But 1980 to 84, it turned out to be a fantastic experience, right? Even though it was Motorola, we went from 20 people to 400 people, $100 million business, and there were 3 of us who actually sort of drove the whole thing, made it happen. So in 1984, when I and my wife looked at it, we said, hey, this is a lot of fun, so maybe we can do this for ourselves as opposed to Motorola. But at that time, there was no venture capital in Toronto, unfortunately, unlike now, there's plenty of it. So we moved to Boston because those days it was Boston and California. In fact, Boston was on par with California those days. And the Motorola headquarters for what I was doing was here. So we did an intercompany transfer and moved here. So that's the sort of the early startup, so it's kind of naive for a young couple just to move into Boston and say, hey, I'm going to do startups, right? But that's a big part of what defines a lot of the entrepreneurs, I think including people in the room. You tend to be a little naive. And naivete is one of the biggest assets of entrepreneurship, right? Because people who are very thoughtful and think through everything, unlikely that they will ever actually do anything. And so, it's naive for somebody to walk into Boston and say, hey, I'll do something. But then once you really get focused on it, you find your way through. And so it took about 3 years for me to get my green card, and as soon as I get the green card, I left, and first company didn't quite work out, and before we can talk about that. And I think, and then it sort of led to one thing to another thing, and then for the last 10 years or so, I've been focusing more on, in 2000, I said I want to stop being the CEO entrepreneur and not get into trouble, but just get other people into trouble. And so that's my job right now, to get other people into trouble. And I've been focusing on both for-profit and the social entrepreneurship. And so we have a pretty big initiative in India, one in MIT, one in Massachusetts, in Lowell Lawrence, and one in Canada. And so it's been exciting to sort of have that diversity of activities, and they all share a very common theme. When people get excited and want to do something, they just make things happen. And so all of our effort is just focused on inspiring people to actually get up and go do something. And if things go wrong, they go wrong, but so what? You still go at it and get things done. So that's my background. So I just wanted to give you the background so that when we talk about questions and answers, you have a context for that. I think when I started my first company, 87, those days, the venture capitalists, the venture capital funds would be like $20, $30 million. That would be the entire fund. So if they were to write a check for $1 million, they really wanted to make sure that the entrepreneur was committed. And so they wanted to see an entrepreneur go without salary for at least 1 year. You had to mortgage your wife, your kids, and cut your lawn, because that's how they judged your commitment. And so my wife kept her job, and we had 2 little kids, and I quit my job, and went without salary for a year. And dream come true. We raised $3 million from T Associates, 7 Rosen, good money. And so as soon as we raised the money, my wife quit her job. And unfortunately, I and my partner, and he was a more senior guy because I had just moved here, had a difference of opinion in terms of how we do the startup. And then, 2 weeks went by, 4 weeks went by, and 6 weeks went by. And then I knew that this is not a good thing. And so one day I was driving up to my work in Westboro, and halfway through I stopped and called up my wife and said, I think I'm going to quit today. And actually I walked into the office and I said, well, it's not a good thing for me to, he was a more senior guy, so it's not good for me to hang around and constantly say, I told you so, right? So that would diminish any chance that we may have. And also it's a lost opportunity for me because if I don't believe in it, I should hang around. And so actually I quit. And when you quit these little jobs, it's not like you have a severance or any package or anything like that. And my wife had quit her job. And both of us being, it's not like I could call up my dad and say, hey, send me a check, because they were all living in India. And so, coming to that state where you have 2 little kids and no insurance and very close to like losing your house and everything else, that's tough. But, I think one thing I've learned is that when you go through these experiences, your comfort zone broadens, because you're so scared of something like this happening, and when it actually happens, you find that, is this all there is to it, And so you move on. And so I got funded and did the next company, and then, so I think most of the people who build these companies, it's that near-death experience that broadens their comfort zone and their ability to take bigger risks. In terms of failures, in terms of making bad decisions, so the best decision I made there was ability to clearly separate what I can control from what I cannot control. And if I don't like something which is not under my control, the best thing to do is to get out, because then you can actually control your destiny. So a lot of times, when you do a startup, whether it's your investor, your co-founder, or whatever, you get into situations where you just don't agree. And if you don't agree, you try hard to convince them the other way around. But if you can't get there, I think the best solution is to just quit, just to do something else, because otherwise you're a negative force in that environment. And so that was probably my big decision. So you have to make decisions quickly, which means when you hire people, when you have co-founders, when you have investors, you are making decisions, right, very quickly. And when you make the decision, obviously it's the right decision, otherwise you won't be making it. But I think the trick is, every decision over the course of time, whether it's 1 week, 2 weeks, a month, a year, whatever, you can very clearly see whether it's a good decision or a bad decision. But as soon as you find that it's a bad decision, make sure you do something about it. If you make a bad hire, as soon as you know it's a bad hire, fire them. I think companies are not really built by making big pivots and big decisions and so on. I think it's the way the group builds value. Let's say every week you make 10 decisions, and you get 5 right and 5 wrong. You don't know which will be 5, because when you make the decision, it's the right decision. But over the course of time, as it becomes obvious as to which is the bad decision, if as a group, if you have the ability to nip that, is to stop investing and just cut out that bad decision, you build value, because your good decisions will sort of accumulate the value. In too many organizations, what happens is people become too egoistic, and there is a very strong association of authorship to ideas. So this is your idea, that's my idea, and so on. Once you have a very strong association with the authorship of the idea, it becomes culturally very difficult to throw away those ideas, because now it becomes political, right? It's a question of who made this decision. And that's what happens in large companies. So in little companies, you make sure that, number one, ideas are obvious. I mean, so that there's a lot of brainstorming, everything else that goes on. But when you make a decision, you're making simple decisions, because doing simple things in life is very hard. If you try to do something hard, it's impossible. So you're trying to do simple things, but even though simple things could be wrong, if it's wrong, you collectively just say, hey, let's get out of this and do something else. And so it's your ability to sort of get away from those bad decisions when they become obvious, I think is the key thing. Because unfortunately, you just don't have time to sort of put a lot of effort into every decision and then make sure that the probability of the decision is better and so on. So it's just a high-speed game, I think. Entrepreneurs are very optimistic, and somehow, it doesn't matter how bad it is, you always feel like tomorrow is going to be better than today. It has no reason. I mean, but you somehow feel like tomorrow is going to be better than today. And in some ways, it's not a bad way to live, right? I mean, isn't it great if you live your whole life thinking that tomorrow is going to be better than today? And so if I sort of look back at my memories, I mean, they're all very fond memories. I mean, it's not like it was just one straight line, but it was just a lot of fun. It was just a lot of fun. So I'm not sure I could really recall, even the quitting that I did, I had not a lot of negative feelings or bitter feelings about life or the world being unfair or not being treated right or anything like that. I just had fun. So I would say, make sure that you continue to, I mean, all of you are entrepreneurs because you're optimistic. And make sure that you build on it. And a lot of times, you come across problems that are just way beyond your ability to solve them. But somehow, if you stay optimistic and stay with it, a lot of the problems go away. I mean, that's not true with every problem, but quite a few problems go away. So I think being optimistic and having that sort of, I have a company in India, and that entrepreneur, obviously, 4 years ago, it's a telecom company, and the whole country was going through this 2G, 3G scam in India, and the revenues dropped from something like 800 to 200, which is like a huge drop. And just not enough time to actually react to it, and therefore the cash was going low. On top of that, when I was there, the building caught fire. So the whole thing, I mean, things couldn't be worse. And then I call this guy up and say, hey, how are things going? Like, oh, great. So I think even though it's not really blind, it's the way the entrepreneur really feels. And I think that's a true asset, and don't give it up.
Okay. Can you think back to your happiest moment in business?
In business? I think the first time I got the funding, that was great. Second time when I got the seed funding, that was great. When the first company went public, that was great. So each one of them have been experiences that I never had before. Getting a customer, and customer saying thanking you, customer buying you a meal, that's great. I mean,
Often little things. Well, I don't want to take, I really want to engage all of you with questions for Desh. So I don't have a wireless microphone, but if there are questions, we have a lot of time. So I'd like to open the floor, and we'd like to hear what you would like to ask Desh. So front, go. Just maybe you could stand up and let us know who you are.
Greg Murphy, Atlantic Motor Labs. I'm just interested more in when you started getting engaged with the social entrepreneurship side of things and what you see is different there.
Okay, well that's what I'm passionate about. So great question. I didn't ask you to ask that question, right? Good. So, year 2000 is when I sort of stopped being the CEO entrepreneur and said, well, let me get more into supporting entrepreneurship. And I joined the board at MIT. So I've been on the board of MIT now for 14 years or so. So the first big initiative we did was at MIT. It's called what happened was a lot of the companies we used to do in the 70s and 80s, a lot of the core technology came from places like Bell Labs and PNR and so on. But by 2000, because there were no more monopolies, There were no more Bell Labs or BNRs. So the center of gravity for new idea generation clearly moved back to universities. And so if entrepreneurs were to have opportunities, the universities have to actually come up with lots of ideas, right? And US taxpayers spend about $50 billion a year in terms of funding university research. And MIT, Caltech, Stanford, they already do a great job. But the question was, can they do anything better? So we started a center for technological innovation in MIT. We put about $20 million into it, and it's sort of a pretty big effort. And the idea behind the effort is that if you have a great idea, if the great idea were to have an impact, it has to be directed to some burning problem in the world. So innovation plus relevance is equal to impact. So how do you bring relevance to people who think about these things? And also, if they have a desire for impact, you connect them to the real problems upfront, so that by the time they bake the idea has some pull in the marketplace, right? And that's been a 10-year effort, very successful. There's about 40 universities now which are sort of embracing new methodology and so on. But then about 9 years ago, I and my wife also happens to be from India, and we both went to this IIT in Chennai in the south. And so we're already working with that institute, and so we want to do something in India. So first we thought maybe we'll duplicate the MIT center in India. But then we said, well, instead of doing technological innovation, can we do social innovation? And so for social innovation, that equation gets turned around. It's really relevance plus innovation is equal to impact. Meaning, for social innovation, relevance is the main thing. It's really understanding the problem in depth, which becomes your core competence. And then the new idea that you bring to solve the problem does not have to be patentable, first time in the world, huge competitive advantage. So in technological innovation, you have to lead with the innovation. Otherwise, you don't have a competitive advantage. In social innovation, you have to lead with relevance, with a deep understanding of the problem itself. So we came up with this idea called the Social Innovation Sandbox, where we took about 5 districts. The idea is to create a Silicon Valley, Boston, for social entrepreneurship. And then we do everything right in that area. And build these companies, build these interventions the same way you build companies. So you really say, let's narrow down what exactly is the new thing that you're trying to do. And then find a way to scale it, reduce the cost, and do all the things that you do in a new company. So we're working with about 50 of those interventions. And just to give you an example of one of the interventions, and there's about the 50, probably 25 are looking pretty good. So this particular organization said, well, a lot of the children in India come hungry to schools. What can we do to solve this problem? So they said, well, let's use some advanced engineering, supply chain, procurement, accounting, logistics, all these things, and maybe solve this problem. So in the sandbox, they built a kitchen. From that one kitchen, they make 175,000 meals a day. 175,000 meals. It's local cuisine, local produce, food that children really love. It's a hot meal. And so they cook it all in one place and then deliver it to all the schools so that the kids get their hot food by 12 o'clock. The cost is 12 cents a meal. $30 feeds a child for the whole year. The government has a program, but the government budget is only $15. So we serve only government schools, so we get that $15, and we raise the other $15 through charity. And once we got this model perfected, we've been scaling it, and today we're at 1.3 million meals every day. So I think if what happens is the world that all of us live in the entrepreneurship and the for-profit world, is brutally competitive. And so if you blink, you're dead. So you have to fight for your survival every day. So in the for-profit world, the execution excellence is given. You don't execute, you're dead, you're gone. But sometimes it's possible for people to lose the compassion, not worry about the environment, not worry about the employees or the vendors, the people that they live around. So compassion you may lack, but no profit ever survives, no for-profit company ever survives without execution excellence. Otherwise, it will be bankrupt. On the non-profit side, obviously people don't start without compassion. compassion is the main thing. But typically the customer does not pay for the service, and so you don't have that natural feedback loop. And also the customer doesn't have a choice, and therefore it's not competitive. So the execution excellence is missing. So what I'm excited about is to actually bring the compassion to the for-profit organizations and bring the execution excellence to the non-profit organizations. You know, if we can do them both, I think we get a world that's good. And just the extension of this. So about 3-4 years ago, you know, originally we thought US needs technological innovation, India needs social innovation. And then we realized that India needs technological innovation and US needs social innovation. So we brought the social innovation sandbox to Massachusetts, Lower Lawrence, and Lawrence happens to be the 41st poorest town in the United States, in spite of all this MIT and Harvard and all the wealth and everything else. And then we started a similar center in University of New Brunswick. Identifying people who don't quite fit into a startup initially is easy. Where the challenge comes is that as you start building the company and everybody works together very well, you make up for each other's deficiencies. You know, you're not that strong in CFO, okay. The CEO says, I'll fill in, I'll help you out, and so on. But as you start getting bigger and bigger and bigger, what breaks you is your weakest link in the chain, right? And you need engineering, finance, sales, marketing, quality, a whole bunch of stuff. And when you start pulling it, what breaks is not your strength, it's your weakness. And so there'll be some members of the team who just don't scale. I mean, maybe they'll scale to 5 mil, maybe 50 mil, but at some point they just can't go any further. So actually it's not even fair even for them to just continue to put the pressure, because they know that they can do the job. Everybody else in the company knows that that's your weak link. And so when you actually replace that person with a better strength, everybody actually appreciates it, including the person that you're replacing. It's a little bit like, you know, climbing a steep hill, let's say Everest. You know, at the beginning, you know, when the slope is small, it doesn't matter. If somebody is a little bit weak, you just give them a little hand, and all together as a team, you get there. But if you get up to the technical climb and you actually have to get up there, if somebody has a weakness, there's no way they can make it. And not only they can't make it, they will diminish the chances of the rest of the team, right? And so that's a big burden to carry for them. And so when you actually replace it, that person is happy and the rest of the team is happy. The only thing is, the person who's making that decision has to be brutally honest with his own capabilities. You know, you cannot have a person who says, no, I'm good in everything, even if things are not happening, but everybody else is weak, right? So your moral strength to actually replace people comes from the fact that you're brutally honest with yourself, with your own capabilities. Because when you get started, you're doing everything. You're picking the toilet paper, you're designing the product, you're selling, you're marketing, you're finance, you're everything. As you grow, you are obviously weak in some of these things. And so you have to admit that you're not good in something and then hire the strength. And if it turns out that you're not a good CEO, you have to replace yourself. And being that brutally honest with yourself is what gets you that moral strength. Quite a few of these entrepreneurs were control freaks. And if you're a control freak, you become very successful earlier on because you can actually integrate everything, you can drive everything. But once you get up to 5 mil, 10 mil, 20 mil, you become the bottleneck because you want to control everything. And so I found that actually your ability to delegate and pretty much make everybody in the company feel like founder of the company benefits you more than anybody else, right? Because then you got all the engines running, you have everybody else working, they're building value, and you are benefiting from the value. And so I said, I'm going to beat this problem up front. And so I've sort of practiced this ability to attract great talent, delegate, share equity, you make them, everybody feel like a founder and so on. And that really worked. That really worked. So I think building a culture of where you're open, transparent, you're delegating, but holding people accountable. I mean, people have to deliver. I think is a great way to build value. And that's what allowed us to grow very rapidly. You know, the first company was pretty fast, but the second company, Sycamore, we started in February 98. Very fifth quarter, we started shipping the product. If you're in New Brunswick, I mean, it's a little bit easier in some ways. Your idea doesn't have to be that profound to actually get funded. So entrepreneurship is sort of, it's always rising above the crowd and taking a risk and pushing an idea that most of the people don't see it. If you're the people who's doing the ecosystem, then what are the key things to reduce the friction? I think it's four things. You need good ideas, you need a good entrepreneur, you need good mentors, and then you need access to capital. So, in fact, those are the four aspects that we work on when I'm a co-chair at Council for President Obama on Innovation Entrepreneurship. And so those are the four things we worked on. So Canada should also do those four things. Number one, ideas. So, Canada funds universities, research a lot of money. If it's 50 billion here, it's probably $5, $6, $7 billion in Canada. So they need to do the same thing, and I've been talking to them quite a bit about how can they have bigger impact with those ideas. How do you do research in a way so that research can have bigger social economic impact? You need entrepreneurs, and I think mostly it's celebrating entrepreneurship. I think in Canada they need to do a lot more of it. In US they do quite a bit, but they are beginning to do even more. So we have a big initiative called Startup America, where you do a 10-city tour, and you actually go and do things like this, and you get all the successful entrepreneurs to come on stage. And the White House uses, Obama, he can't do much, but he has a huge convening power. So just celebrating entrepreneurship and inviting the entrepreneurs to the White House and just celebrating that part of it is a great thing, and Canada should do more of it. Mentors. That's a very important thing, because I think, people always are trying to do something new in the entrepreneurial journey, but they don't need to fumble on the same thing that people have done before. And so having mentors really helps, because then it sort of reduces your risk of having to figure everything out for yourself. And then having policies for access to capital. And when governments do access to capital, they should make very sure that they are not the people picking winners and losers, which is what happens most of the time. The governments think that they know where to invest, and that's a mistake. So, but they should make sure that they work on access to capital strategies so that people have access to capital, but the capital is coming from people who are knowledgeable and also risking their own personal money a little bit, because then there's something in the game. So I think if we can work on those four things, more than anything else, I think it's really people like you becoming successful and becoming role models for other people. The excitement in New Brunswick seems to be because this Radiant 6, Q and Lab, a few things that sort of really became successful, and everybody else said, hey, if you can do it, I can do it too. It's just that. Too many times people build the big infrastructure, a lot of access to everything else, but then there's no entrepreneurs. So there will never be enough money for all the entrepreneurs, because not every entrepreneur should get funded. Every entrepreneur feels that his idea is the greatest idea. I never had an entrepreneur come to me and say, I have a lousy idea, right? But we know that not all ideas are great. And so it will never be enough. But I think so, having higher quality entrepreneurs is sort of the main thing. If you have that, everything else sort of comes in, I think. I think entrepreneurs are made. So I can talk to you a little bit about the project we're doing in this social innovation sandbox in India. You know, in India, most of the kids who go to college are probably the least entrepreneurial because they get rewarded for memorizing answers and you spit them out in the question papers and you get good grades, and if you get good grades, your life is made, right? And so, but we said, hey, you know, all these young people, I mean, they must be capable of doing a lot more than this. So we started a program where 4 kids come together, college kids come together, pick 8 problems in the society, and then they solve it. So now we have 10,000 students doing 2,500 projects. So what happens is, you know, every place, every society, every ecosystem, there's always problems. So I think the first step is to sort of notice the problem. And then most of the people, if they get that far, then they just sit back and complain about those problems. So every problem exists because there's a deadlock, right? I mean, it doesn't have money, it doesn't have this, it doesn't have, there's some reason as to why it exists, and it's existed for a long time. So somebody, when they get passionate about solving that particular problem, they find a way to unknot that knot, and then slowly they sort of open it up, and the problem gets solved. Doesn't matter whether the problem that you're trying to solve is small or big. That experience of actually having solved a problem is invaluable because it's very empowering. You know, you really get a taste of what it's like, and you suddenly feel like, hey, I'm not helpless. I mean, you know, every problem, I can solve problems. And so when you go through that experience, it's a lifelong experience, I think. And then every problem in the world starts looking like an opportunity. And when you have a community of people where problems start looking like an opportunity, the mood changes, right? Because now you don't have a lot of people just sitting around and complaining about everything. They actually do things. In fact, these kids who run around, they wear a blue t-shirt, and on the back of the t-shirt it says, complaints start with they, solutions start with I, right? So instead of sitting and complaining about things, when you become passionate about a problem and you find a solution to it, it's just very empowering. So the same problem, if a prof gives you that problem and says, go solve this, it becomes homework. If a student picks the problem on his own to solve, it becomes an entrepreneurial experience. So making people passionate about something that they want to do, and then finding their own resources, their own things, their own connections, their own contacts to actually solve that problem is what I think universities need to do more of. See the problem, and then he thinks he has a solution, right? And the solution typically is either a product or a service. And so you come up with a product or service, and it has a certain cost to it. If the cost of that particular product or service is lower than what the people who benefit from it are willing to pay, it becomes a free market economy candidate, right? So you can actually grow it so that you can make some money. If the margins are pretty high, then it becomes a very juicy, high profit company, high growth, high profit company. If it is just a little bit about what it costs you, you really can't make a lot of money, but it's very important to run it as a for-profit company because then you can scale that benefit to a lot of people. You know, instead of going and raising money from somebody else and then helping 10 people, you can actually start scaling that to thousands and thousands and thousands. But the primary motivation for the people who start B Corp is not so much the profit that you make, the bottom line that you make, but how many people you can help. So you're using this technique, the free market economy technique, so that you can benefit a lot of people with the intervention that you come up with. It's a good way to get things going because accredited investors putting a lot of money restricts the amount of access that you have to the capital. So if people can give $10, $50, $100, and a lot of them to actually get something going, it's a good thing. In fact, that's one of the big parts of the Jobs Act that our council passed a couple of years ago. But it's not fully done yet in US, because if you know, the Kickstarter and so on are things where you actually pre-buy the product itself. And so that's okay, you prepay for the product. But if you actually give small amounts of money for equities, then I think the SEC is very concerned that someday some old grandma will lose money, and that will be the end of crowdfunding, because then there will be very heavy regulatory burden put on that whole thing, and then it will not work. A small accredited investor, the concept is that you're investing money that you can afford to lose. So I think it should be the same concept. I mean, people, if they're putting money into these things, they should put the money that they can afford to lose. But now, because it's a smaller amount of money, you get a bigger participation. It's very well understood in the social entrepreneurship space. Like, for example, Kiva, which is an organization where, you just say, hey, this person in Africa, if you give him $25, he can get this business going, and maybe someday he'll pay you back, right? They do it. I mean, Kiva is only 5-6 years old. The good thing about having a lot of entrepreneurs is that you actually engage a lot of people in solving problems, which is a good thing. But the bad thing is it creates an intense competition, because if there's something good, there's the next guy who wants to do something better than that. And so as you build your business, you have to make sure that you have a good long-term value, you build your customer relationships. Stickiness and retention of your customer base is going to be very important, because the value that you build is your base and the ability not just to sell them, but to be able to retain them. That stickiness, I think, is going to become more and more important, because the competition is going to be pretty intense as time goes on. But the basic principles of being very focused, particularly when you're small, is very important. That is, what is it that the little companies don't have? What they don't have is time, they don't have resources. And so, a lot of times, the mentors, when you go and talk to the mentors, you tell them something, and then the first thing they'll say, but have you thought about this? Have you thought about selling into this market? How about that? How about this? So, most of the time, I think when you talk to other people, you get lots of new ideas, but you broaden the scope of what you're trying to do, which is a big mistake. I mean, I think you have to have a vision to get very large, very big, but the steps that you climb to get to that big thing have to be very deliberate, and the smaller the step, the bigger is your chance of success. So, thinking about something small to do that has a huge value for customers is the secret. So, whatever you try to do, cut it into half, cut it into a quarter, and then just do that piece. Because a lot of times the ideas fail. It's easy to think of something where you do everything and you sell it for nothing, and it's a great product. But it's very hard to get there, right? And so I think be very focused, because ultimately the amount of cash you have decides how much time you have. It's I think the way to think about a lot of startups is that it's a little bit like driving through the desert. You have a certain amount of gas, and you need to make sure that you have enough gas to get to the next gas station. And you have to be very focused in terms of making sure that you actually get there, get more gas, and then get to the next gas station. Because if you get stuck halfway in between, the tow truck will come and you're done. End of the game, right? So, making sure that you don't get scope creep, feature creep, everything else in what you're trying to do, and having the confidence that whatever little thing that you do can actually bring a lot of value is very important to sort of build those steps to actually get up to something substantial. That's huge, right? I mean, we need energy, we need clean water, we need air, we need a lot of these big challenges. And a lot of these big challenges are not going to be solved by one big breakthrough. Even if you have one E equal to MC square, that innovation has to get contextualized in hundreds of different ways. And so, and that's the sort of the fun part of what's happening right now. 50 years ago, it was just a handful of people who were technologists who thought about the whole thing, and then their solutions were available for everybody else. But now, there's so many people who understand technology a little bit better and are entrepreneurial that they have the ability to take these solutions and contextualize to whatever the markets they have, whatever the country they live in, and so on. So I think contextualizing innovation is going to be an opportunity for a long time to come. And the contextualizing the solutions, it's not like everybody is fit to come up with solutions for all of these things. For example, MIT is a powerhouse of innovation, right? It depends on what your perspective of life is. If your whole perspective is to become an entrepreneur as early as you can and do something, maybe there's some merit to it. But the way I sort of look at my life is that I want to have fun with whatever I'm doing. Doing PhD is probably one of the most happiest thing you can do. I mean, you get to intellectually hang around and explore things without having responsibility for anything, right? And is that like getting a PhD? Is that the best thing you can do to be an entrepreneur? But that's not what I was trying to be. I just wanted to get a PhD. And then, so I think it's, as long as you're enjoying what you're doing, I think that's the bottom line. If you're not enjoying the university and you feel like you want to leave and go become an entrepreneur, you should do that, because otherwise you'll be wasting your time. But I think the PhD, like any education in some ways teaches you how to wrestle with ideas, how to think about something deeper and deeper and so on. A lot of times in entrepreneurship, you need something where you need to know a lot about not much, because you can integrate everything together. You can get people to help you and so on. So in some ways, getting a very high education like a PhD and entrepreneurship are the opposite ends, right? In PhD, you get a PhD when you know more and more about less and less. And in fact, you get a PhD when you know everything about nothing, right? and entrepreneurship is just the opposite. It's like you have to know everything about not much, about everything. You have to know nothing about everything, right? Because you have to sort of have a broad perspective. You have to know when you understand something, when you don't understand something, you pull in people and so on. So, but at the same time, if you can get a PhD and still retain your common sense, I mean, that's a big compliment.
Wait, well, I'm going to do